Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come out and join us today. We look forward to sharing our morning with you. My name is Larry Bogar. I'm the managing member of Bogar LK Financial, LLC, and we are extremely proud and happy to be sponsors of this year's Business Owners Forum. I am looking forward to the day, as we do every year, and hope that you'll join us in the years to come. That said, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Marty Shenkman. Marty is a trust and estates attorney. His practice focuses
Cashmere sweaters, expensive blouses.
his practice focuses on estate and tax planning for closely held businesses and estate administrations. Marty is the author of 43 books and more than 1,275 articles. He's an editorial board member of Trust and Estates Magazine, CCH, co-chair of Professional Advisory Board, the CPA Journal, and Matrimonial Strategist through 2018. He has previously served on the editorial board of many other tax, estate, and real estate publications. And I have the distinct pleasure of being able to call Marty a close personal friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Marty Shenkman. Marty, as Mark has pointed out, the world is shifting quickly beneath the feet of business owners these days. And depending on how things go, it will continue to shift. With that in mind, and the fact that we do have to be quick on our feet, my question to you would be, why do owners in, say, the $10 to $50 million range have to plan now before the end of this year?
So let me give you a quick thought, building on something Mark said. You know, estate planning. Well, you know, my business is struggling. I'm struggling. Like, how can I think about estate planning? Estate planning is for people that are really wealthy and successful. Let's start with the premise that from Mark's introductory comments. We have hope. Instead of looking at the difficulties that many businesses are experiencing now, look at them as an opportunity. If the value of your business was 50 million pre-COVID, it may now be 10 or 20 million. Instead of looking at the negatives, because as Mark said, we're all going to be optimistic and rebuild. It's just a question of it taking some time. That's an opportunity to shift assets out of your estate. So let's look at squeezing lemonade out of all the COVID lemons that we may have from an estate planning perspective. Now, so I think that's important, because I don't want anyone saying, gee, you know, things are tough, I'm not going to even think about estate planning. How can I? You need to. And here's why. And by the way, just as a big caveat, I am not making any political statements, but there is certainly a possibility that when we finally know the election results, whenever that may be, that there may be a Democratic sweep, or certainly a shift in control to the Democrats. If that occurs, and I'm not predicting, but if it does, the Democratic proposals across the board consistently for more than a decade have been to make a much harsher tax system for the wealthy. Biden has talked repeatedly about rolling back the 2017 tax law, which to a great extent did favor the very wealthy, although the 199A deduction certainly helped a lot of smaller businesses. But if they lower the estate tax exemption from the current 11.58 to the 3.5 million that many of the proposals have talked about, closely held business owners, and use a $10 to $50 million range as a guesstimate of value, just for discussion's sake, will be impeded from doing any kind of planning. If you have a business that's worth $10 million now, you can simply gift that business to a trust, get it out of your estate. And if the exemption drops to 3.5 million, the entire value of the business is out of your estate. All the growth, being optimistic like Mark was in his introduction, all that's out of your estate. But one of the other key points is it's not only about the estate tax exemption. It's about asset protection planning, protecting your assets from lawsuits and claims. It's about preparing the next generation in succession planning. If you have a business that you can move out of your estate today at the current value, in 5 years from now, you have an exit strategy that includes selling out part or all of the business. All that gain could be out of your estate.
Excellent, excellent. Question though, is saving the exemption the only issue that business owners should be concerned about?
No, and that's a great question. But again, just to reemphasize, if you have a business, a closely held business worth 5, 10, 20, 50, $100 million, if you haven't already jumped on the planning bandwagon, see if you can still find an estate planner, and please do it immediately. Because if the proposals that we've all heard about for more than a decade, going back to President Obama's Green Book that he issued every year, if those are enacted, you are going to face an incredibly devastating estate tax. So plan now. But it's not just the exemption. That's all that seems to be talked about. But here's another twist to it that's really important. The Democratic proposals have included assessing a generation skipping transfer tax on a trust every 50 years. Now, that may not sound like much, but what that could entail, especially if the rate goes up, which it likely would, is if assets you put in a trust today can be outside the tax system forever and ever, depending on state law. You can pass wealth down dynastically for multiple generations in a very advantageous way. If you wait and that one change is enacted effective, say, January 1 next year, which is what some pundits think may happen, a retroactive tax bill to 1/1/21, every 50 years, if you lose half the value of your estate and you project out 2-3 generations, your great-grandchildren, what they will inherit will be devastated, decimated. So planning now is about much more than just the exemption. That's one really critical point. Another key point, they've talked about having assets of grantor trusts. Grantor trust is a trust that the income of which is taxed to you. And if we had more time, I could elaborate more, but it's really a very powerful estate planning tool. But they're talking about having assets of grantor trusts taxed in the person's estate who set up the trust. That will devastate planning as we know it today. If there's a chance that a trust you set up before, say, January 1 or whatever the effective date is, because we don't know that either, obviously. We don't even know what the results will be or what the changes might be. But if that's what happens, if you can get a trust grandfathered by having it in place before these changes, that's a grand slam from a planning perspective. Really, really huge. So think much broader than just the articles in the media about using your exemption. It's really much more than that.
Excellent. Quick question, because right here we talk about many clients who basically go out the door, they get carried out. Some will walk out of the door. They'll get that letter that says, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse, in that area. How do we also protect that client who suddenly has the opportunity to sell?
I actually have a conversation going on right now with several clients, one of whom just called me for the first time because they just got an LOI from somebody for more money than they thought their business was worth. And I said, well, you're kind of late in the game, but we'll see what we can do. Because the problem is, there's a continuum, right? And on one side of the continuum, you got nothing going on. You can value your business as aggressively as an appraiser says you can for gift and estate planning purposes. On the other hand, you have a signed contract. But where are you on that long line, the continuum in between? The closer you move to a final deal, the less you can argue for a lower value on the business. The closer you move to a final deal, the less you can argue that there's a discount for lack of marketability of your business because you may already have it sold. So you lose options as you move forward. This individual is close enough that we're looking at shifting by way of a gift, a large chunk of the business into a trust to get it out of their estate at a current value that will be less than what it might be sold for, because there's nothing binding and we don't even know that the deal will go through. We're going to give some of their business to a charitable remainder trust, because then that gain when it's sold will be outside the estate, and we'll probably look at revisiting their insurance coverage and so on. And by creating a powerful dynastic GST exempt trust, in English, that means that it's out of everybody's estate forever if it's grandfathered. A grantor trust, they can transfer and sell interest in the business to that trust without triggering an income tax. We're creating a legacy for all future generations. We're also creating a great asset protection plan from them. If you have a liquidation event, and when that company is liquidated, those tens of millions of dollars that are received are in a very strong asset protected trust. If you are subject to a suit, claim, or issue, you could be very, very well protected. And we live in the most litigious society on the planet in the history of this world, and that's never going to change no matter what happens in Washington. It just seems to be the American way. So getting your assets protected is really critical. Now, there's another piece, Lawrence, Larry, I don't remember, did we have anything about non-grantor trust and state income tax? Or should I throw something in quick?
Throw it in, please.
So another thing that you can look at, so I live in New Jersey. That is incorrect. I now live in Connecticut. I used to live in New Jersey. That was a estate planning maneuver. I got to keep my line straight in case New Jersey's listening. But if you live in like New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, California, those states seem to have a contest going to see who can have the highest tax rates. So one of the things that in the right circumstances could be very valuable is if you can shift the business interest outside your estate into what's called a non-grantor or complex trust. That's a trust that does not pay current income tax. When you sell the business, you may be able to avoid all state income tax on the sale proceeds. Now, keep in mind, it's tricky. We could do a whole program on just avoiding state income tax because it's critical, but that could be huge. If you're facing a 10% tax on a $20 million business, that's $2 million. That's a huge savings to inure for you, for your future, and for your descendants. So state income tax needs to be factored into it. And oftentimes what you need to do is a balance of grantor trusts and non-grantor trust. We have a number of transactions we're working on for a number of clients. We're doing some grantor trust, some non-grantor trust, because without a crystal ball, no one's sure what's going to happen with the exit strategy. And we're kind of hedging our bets in all directions. But you should certainly look at that because state income tax, especially if you're in New York, is huge. And by the way, if someone tells you you cannot do a non-grantor trust or a incomplete non-grantor trust technique in New York, that's not correct. You can do it as a completed gift non-grantor trust, just not as a incomplete gift. And I just feel pressured for time where I would explain all of that more slowly and clearly. I just want to give you ideas so that you can jot them down and talk to your attorney and accountant about them.
Well, we'll make sure that everyone has the opportunity to follow up on these. The question that I would have is, how might a business owner separate control and non-control slices of their business to maximize the discounts that you mentioned?
So let me explain what discounts are. If you have a $100 building, if I have a $100 building and Mark owns 50% and I own 50%, I don't know if you guys know this, but Mark's a very tough negotiator. If he has 51% of that building, I'm not going to see a penny. So even though the building's $100 and I own 49%, if Larry owned the other 51%, maybe my 49% will be worth $49. But if a tough guy like Mark owns it, my 49% may only be worth $30. That's a discount because I don't have control. So what you want to do in many cases, especially as your business value gets over the 11.58 million current exemption, if you want to lever it into a trust, is you may want to maximize discounts. So one of the things you can do is you can slice and dice with the tax Ginsu knife your business into voting and non-voting. In fact, one of the things that we do for a lot of companies that are formed as LLCs is we may create a special voting interest that has the tax sensitive rights of liquidation and distribution, carve those off in a 1% managing interest and give it to a trust that's different from where we send all the rest of the assets as part of the plan. So you may use 2 or 3 trusts as part of the plan to maximize the discounts on value. Before you go down that path, you have to look at the value of the business, the risk, how much you want to transfer, whether you have a spouse and are each transferring part of it. So, you could have double the 11.58 million exemption.
Oh, interesting. Now, how can a business owner get access to assets in an irrevocable trust? Otherwise, how can they push assets safely out of their estates?
That is the single most important question for 2020 planning. And it is the exact word access. That was why so much of the planning done in 2012, if you remember back to the mad rush to do planning then, which was not even as bad as what we're seeing right now. People made gifts of interest in their business, their wealth to kids, trust for kids, grandkids. In most cases, unless your wealth is so great that you'll never, ever, ever need it, which unless it's well over, it's not only a dollar amount, say 50 million or 100 million, but it also depends on your spending patterns. But why on earth should you give away your interests in your business and your other family wealth where you can't get access to it. There's no need for that. I can set up a trust for my wife, and I have, and all my descendants, so they benefit, but yet my wife is still a beneficiary. So if my spouse is a beneficiary, I can indirectly benefit through her. Why push assets out of your estate where you cannot get to them? And many of the people that did planning in 2012 later regretted it because they couldn't get at their own wealth. Just foolish planning. If you're single, you can set up a self-settled domestic asset protection trust. There's now 19 states that permit those types of trusts. So it's grown dramatically. And when I mixed up my Jersey versus Connecticut earlier, I moved my domicile last year from New Jersey to Connecticut because Connecticut permits self-settled trusts. So I'm able to shift wealth out of my estate to make it protected from claimants and creditors, out of my estate, no matter what they do with the exemption, but I can still benefit from it. My wife is a beneficiary, and even I can be a beneficiary. There's lots of techniques, and if we have more time, I could go through them, but make sure if you are transferring assets, you really know for sure that you're never, ever going to need access to it, or make sure you have access. Because to give away money and find you have to call up your daughter and say, Jane, you know, I could use a few dollars to go to the supermarket. Would you mind sending me some money? Nobody wants to do that, nor should you, because there's ample, sophisticated, flexible trust planning techniques to let you pretty much have your cake and within reason, eat it too.
It sounds like one of the key things is to make sure that you have the right people on your team and use them. Now, what about this?
Let me respond to that. Team approach is the only way to fly. If you're doing estate planning, you must have your insurance advisor, your financial advisor, or investment advisor. Maybe they're one and the same. Those elements have to be on the team, or you will not do the planning well. Your trust officer, your corporate accountant, your estate planner, everybody's got to collaborate. This is not a solo practice.
I agree. Now, what about the single business owners? We're seeing more and more single entrepreneurs come up these days. What options exist for the single clients that cannot create, say, spousal trusts?
So I kind of spilled the beans earlier because I didn't know that was the question coming, but let me elaborate. So for married couples, I can create a trust for my wife. She can create a trust for me and all descendants. Those trusts have to be different or they can be unraveled. But since I'm a beneficiary of her trust, she's a beneficiary of my trust. If we put $100 into each trust, each of us together can benefit from all those assets. So we've moved it all out of our estate, yet we benefit from it all. If you're single, you'd have to rely on other techniques such as a domestic asset protection trust. And I said earlier, there's 19 jurisdictions that permit that. New York does not permit it. And there's an issue. Some people think that if you're a resident in New York, you cannot use those types of trusts. I don't think that's necessarily a correct interpretation. So if you set up a trust in Alaska, Nevada, South Dakota, and Delaware, those are the four most popular states, but Connecticut has a great statute. You may do what I did and move to Connecticut. We used to have a vacation home here. We made a weekend place. We made it our primary residence because it makes the planning work. You may not feel as crazy about that as I do, but it's certainly an option. And with a nearby place like Connecticut, you know, we have some nice homes. Come visit. But apart from that, what you can also do is there's a concept called a hybrid DAPT. What that is, domestic asset protection trust, but I'm not a beneficiary today. I give my buddy Larry, and I shudder to even admit how long we know each other. It could be, it'll make me feel old, I won't say. I give Larry the power in a non-fiduciary capacity to add descendants of my parents back to my trust, or even descendants of my grandparents to my trust as a beneficiary. So it's not a self-settled trust. So even though you're in New York, nobody really should be able to say it's a self-settled trust because I'm not a beneficiary. But if I need money down the road, I call my good buddy up, Larry, and say, hey, Larry, could you please add me back? And maybe he'll be kind enough to do so. There's another newer concept called a special power of appointment trust. And in case you need another estate planning acronym, SPAT or SPAT is the acronym, because we love acronyms, right? That's how we keep clients confused and they think we know more because we use lots of acronyms. So if Larry has the power not to add me as a beneficiary, because then it's a self-settled trust, but I give Larry the unfettered authority to call up the trustee and say, hey, trustee, give Shenkman $100,000, and they have to do it. It's a special collateral or naked power of appointment because Larry has no interest as a beneficiary in the trust. And that's a technique that should be able to protect me, yet also not let me have the risk of a self-settled trust. All of those are great tools for New Yorkers. Let me give you another really quick example that works for everybody and should probably be in almost every trust that's not a non-grantor trust. Power to loan. I can give Mark Kravitz the power in a non-fiduciary capacity to tell the trustee of my trust, loan Shenkman money. Any amount he says they have to loan me. That will guarantee it's a grantor trust. And most people evaluated that power historically from a tax construct, tax perspective, tax lens, but it's got an incredible economic lens. If I'm not a beneficiary of a trust that I set up for my kids, descendants, or my spouse, or all of the above, right? Mark can loan me money. I don't care if I die owing my trust money. It gives me cash flow to pay my bills and do what I want and have the lifestyle I need. So that's another mechanism you can incorporate into all this planning. And the key takeaway point is you really need to plan now because all the rules may change. But if you plan smart, plan flexibly, and make Gumby your motto. You all remember Gumby?
Oh, yeah.
At the end, Mark is going to ask you what the name of Gumby's horse was. And if you get it, you'll get a prize from A-Line Wealth Management. You gotta remember. Oh, you gave it away.
Pokey.
But if you plan flexibly, the Gumby approach to planning, right? That little bendable critter that we used to play with when we were little, that's what you want. You want lots of flexibility. My gosh, if I told you in January, you'd be having a Zoom meeting for this because the world would be taken over by pandemic, you would have thought I watched a few too many rerun movies with Dustin Hoffman. But look at how the world's changed. So you need flexibility, and there's lots of creative ways to build in access to your money. And that all should dovetail with the financial forecast that shows you have enough money without tapping it, if possible, so that you have that to deflect creditor claims or IRS claims that you had an agreement with the trustee. And by the way, I always like to use an institutional trustee. They operate it properly. They run the trust properly. And if you have a family business, you structure it as what's called a directed trust, where you hire a pure administrative trustee. They don't invest. They don't have anything to do with your investments. They charge you a small flat annual fee. But having an institution is a great safety measure to protect from claims and make sure the trust is administered, especially as you add some of these extra powers that we've talked about to give you access.
Well, Marty, I'm gonna cut in here a second. Larry and Marty, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I know we were only supposed to go 20 minutes. We went well above that, but
Okay.
it was all fabulous information. Marty, you killed it. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Larry, great questions. I truly thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Sure, pleasure.